I'd like to introduce Dr. Mary Beth Hall. You can stay at your table if you want, Bill. All right. So this is Dr. Mary Beth Hall. She's also a member of the National Animal Nutrition Program Committee. She's a USDA ARS scientist in Wisconsin, and she was previously at University of Florida on staff there as a professor, and so she's going to speak, or she has the tough job, I should say, of having no time in between when you finish, basically, and making some very informed and insightful summaries of what you've said, I hope. So.
There's nothing like being extemporaneous. All right, we should have a slide set up in a minute. And first things first, I'm glad you kept talking as he was trying to introduce me, because it told me either one, you were really, really engaged with the topics you had at hand, or alternatively, you came to really, really like the other people who were at your table, which is also a positive thing as we bring a group of different people together. All right, now, what I'm going to start with are a slide set that, based on previous discussions, based on what this meeting's about, I thought was going to fit no matter what you folks ended up speaking about. But from the notes that I've gotten from you all, it will. I mean, if you take a look at what we've talked about today, it's how animal agriculture, how crop agriculture, how sustainability end up fitting in to meet societal needs. I mean, that's what this is all about, and doing it for the long term, not just for today, and not just here in the United States. And if we take a look, and here the graphics you'll have up in the upper, let's see, from your point of view, in the upper left-hand corner, we have human society. In the right, we have animal agriculture, and you will notice that there are indeed fish in that picture, okay? And at the bottom, supporting it all, we do have crop agriculture. One of the things they never bothered to teach us in school, I don't think, is that we live in our own ecological web. Society has its own ecological web, its food web. We normally think about that when we're looking at wolves, rabbits, voles, and so forth. But think about it for people. I mean, if you look at how crops end up serving to support both human society and animal agriculture, you have food, fiber, biofuel, and an incredible array of plant-based products going into human society. When you're dealing with animals, you would have basically whatever products would be going to human, but absolutely things like feed and bedding are being derived from crops. But you take it a step further, and it isn't just the crops that are supporting human society. And you have food, fiber, and an incredible array of animal-based products going from animal agriculture over to human society. And it isn't just food and fiber. With a project that Robin White and I have been working on, it's incredible the number of different products that are derived from animal products, or actually from plant products, that go into products we use that are derived from these, that on the surface you look at this thing you're using, this bottle of something, and it wouldn't be apparent, but if it weren't for the crop and animal agriculture, you might not have that product, okay? Well, those are the positive outputs, but this may go back to biology class, I guess the teacher was trying to just get our attention one day when it was a late afternoon, and she indicated, you do know that everything eats everything else's poop, okay? This is where the world cycles. The same applies within the human ecological web. Human society ends up putting biosolids, fertilizer, any of a variety of products back on the land to support crops. cows, pigs, chickens, the manure ends up going back on the land. But I also had a discussion earlier that we were talking, and I mentioned there seems to be a terrestrial bias here. We do need to have a further discussion about when we have aquaculture, where do those nutrients go so that they can be properly used and not turn into a waste, okay? But on land, we'll have the manure bedding and all go back to the cropland. The other thing that you find is human society also relies on animal agriculture to take care of things that would otherwise be waste. And it was earlier mentioned that we have byproduct feeds of things that people either won't or can't eat that animals can. We make cotton clothing. You do not want to eat a lot of cottonseed because it has gossypol in it and it will make your liver turn green and you will not be happy in the long run, okay? You have a glass of orange juice. You have citrus pulp. There's not a lot of that consumed by humans, and let alone our biofuel plants, our ethanol plants. That distiller's grain does not go for human consumption. Now, if you get the distiller's grain that's made from whiskey, that's human food grade all the way along, you can eat that, okay? But otherwise, we rely on animals to take care of these millions and millions of tons of byproducts, take some more nutrients out, and convert that into something we can use, okay? So think about this cycle as our food web. And the things that were mentioned earlier today, for this to be sustainable, we've got to think of what are the economic impacts, how economically do these pieces fit together, that they'll turn a profit so that they're like carrot or stick, so that they will be maintained. How do we get enough food out of the system to meet our needs? How do we maintain soil resources, our land resources, our water resources, to make sure that it can continue? And so we move on a step. We have the same arrows going back and forth, but in the midst of all of this, actually encompassing all of it, what we have is our air, our water, our land, and our entire environment, and everything else that lives on this planet with us, okay? If we get inefficiencies with how the products trade back and forth amongst the different pools, both as primary products or as, let's call it co-products that are being recycled. If we have inefficiencies there, we have these red arrows. And what those red arrows represent are inefficiencies where we end up losing nutrients from a more desirable use. And so, as we look at how nutrition plays into this, it gets pretty obvious pretty quickly, and it's reflected in your comments, that nutrition cannot function as an island, but it very much has to be a part of an integrated approach that addresses all of the areas along that circle, that trading back and forth between the pools. Because whatever we can do to improve the efficiencies and meet our goals, we're going to be in a better position to have a sustainable system. And the goals are economic, they're food, they're socioeconomic, they're environmental. And once upon a time, I saw this program on the BBC being what it is with British humor, and there was this hospital that was receiving an award for being incredibly efficient and just as smoothly running as anything you could possibly hope for. And the folks who had come to the hospital to present them this award were walking through, and you saw nurses and doctors going through the hallway, and it was all pristine and clean, and they stopped and they said, well, where are the patients? And I said, well, no, there are no patients here, otherwise we couldn't have won the award, okay? Well, what we have to do when we look at any system like this, and what we're trying to do with the science and integrating of systems, is we've got to make sure they're done in a basis that reflects the real world and the real conditions that we're facing. Okay. So now to your comments, and I summarize them relatively quickly. What you don't see, if you do not hear precisely what you have offered, it will show up in a final report that goes with this meeting. And I thank you for the efforts you put into the discussions. I mean, our first question went to, what are the primary barriers to relying on animal nutrition research to identify meaningful strategies to improve the health and welfare of both humans and livestock? Two top things were infrastructure. I mean, what is existing there to make it possible? And also socio-political issues. Politics of I think, Marcus, you mentioned earlier, we're from the federal government and here to help you. Politics comes and can be very, very helpful, or upon occasion appears to be able to provide barriers. And what we need to do is figure out across disciplines, how can we address things that matter? And then it's up to the stakeholders who have a vested interest in the outcome to speak to government, because I tell you what, government employees cannot. We would be fired. That'd probably be a good thing, but at any rate. Another thing that is limiting is funding. Some of the questions, actually many of the questions that are being asked, are really pretty basic research questions, or very applied questions that may have absolutely no product involved with them. And so you do get the question of who's going to fund them, and let alone, besides just taking the nutrition portion, in an integrated system, which has people looking at the economics, looking at the land, looking at nutrient flows, looking at life cycle analysis. That, in the current system, that very infrequently comes from industry. There needs to be something built to support it if it's deemed to be important. One of the things that you raised that was a barrier was also public perception. Now, first things first, we got to presume that anybody knows that nutrition research is done with livestock. If you sit on the plane and get into a conversation with the person next to you, and you happen to be an animal nutritionist, they say, "You do what with dairy cows?" Yeah. It's not necessarily a field that folks are familiar with. So you start a conversation. I think I heard Roger Cady mention earlier, you don't give them a mind dump. You convert it into something that perchance they can relate to, that puts it in a context they can deal with. Okay? I think, Roger, what did you say? Your net result for talking about improving feed efficiency was it makes less poop?
It wasn't mine. It was my neighbor who, after I told her that it took 4 cows in 1944 to produce what 1 cow does today, she said, "Oh, that means they produce less poop." She got it. That was it. She didn't need all the stuff in the scientific publication.
And you would have annoyed her had you tried to give it to her.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, so again, with public perception, part of this is making sure that we can translate things so that people understand or get what the issues might be and that they might matter. And scientists frequently either don't do that or we don't do it well. We do need translators. And perchance, maybe more scientists need to get a handle on being able to do that. Because if we don't have conversations, if we just stand up and pontificate, we're also going to lose it. It was also mentioned that the public might have resistance to technology, and that's the one piece I picked up from it. And I think that goes to earlier comments about some of the technologies that we use that, people throw up their hands and say, "Why are you doing this?" There's a professor out on the West Coast who said it's easier to scare people than to unscare them. We need to have an understanding of, for the public, why on earth would you do this? What effect does it have on the animal? What effect is it going to have when I eat the food or my child does? Where does it fit in the scheme? Again, translations, education. Now, this last item ended up fitting in 2 places, so I'll move to the next question, which was on How can animal nutritionists do a better job of being relevant and present in efforts to improve human and animal health and welfare? And that goes back to the need to, one of the things was the need to translate. Translate the research so it can actually be applied. We come up with a heck of a lot of really, really good research, but what is its connection to the person who's trying to feed the livestock and make a living? And we need to do that so that the research can be applied locally, globally, and integratively. Again, otherwise we're not relevant. What was the comment? What percent of the funding is going to animal ag now? Like 13%, and the rest of it, let's say, is going elsewhere, and let's say more predominantly to agronomy? If we're not relevant in the larger scheme of things, if we're not integrated, yeah, we won't be relevant. It was suggested we get involved in the development of relevant and appropriate models that would include nutrition as a part of them for answering the questions in the systems. An overall need to take a systems approach, and that we have to add economics to the point. Add economic impact to some of the things we're doing, or at least get to that point when we're taking it and trying to create something applied. Money is what makes things move. I think that just says it. We'll move on. But that might mean you might actually have to collaborate with an economist to make sure that you look at something more than just what simply changed with the feed cost. Did you change something with the cost of the feeding system? What was it going to do with the chain of people that were going to be involved in those changes? A friend of mine, when he was a grad student, he went over to a local feed mill, and he told them just what he wanted them to make, a feed he wanted them to make for this research trial. And they took a look at the ingredient list, and I can't remember, it might have been about 20% fat, and he wanted them to mix other ingredients in that through a feed mill. And they looked at him, they looked at the paper, they looked at him, and they said, "We want you to be here when we make this mix." So again, I mean, there are things you might not even imagine, but people, including more people in the conversation, will make it more likely you come up with something that's useful rather than something that shows up in the annals of irreproducible research or in the internet. Okay, so what needs to happen to enable animal nutrition research to be more prominent in discussions of human and animal health and welfare? Actually, by the way, as I was reading this, I think it's very important, and it's very cool that we talk about both human and animal health and welfare. Part of the deal was improving the transparency, both the data, the analysis, and the interpretation. It's kind of like you might trust your friends, but somebody out of the blue says something that may not agree with you, but you're not entirely decided. It's better if things are as clear and transparent as can be. And especially as we get into a time frame where the sharing of data sets, I think actually we're already at the time frame where sharing of data sets is essential for us to make progress, developing models that integrate more information, that transparency becomes essential. And a willingness to play well with others. That didn't show up anywhere on here. That has to be part of it. The suggestion was that nutritionists are going to need to become more conversant in socio-political issues, not just nutrition. Why does it matter? And that may also get back to the translations. And lastly, the last thing I'll leave you with, and more things will be included in the report, we need to educate and we need to engage, not just with ourselves, but with the public. If we can put things in a context where people, or particularly colleagues in other disciplines, can get an understanding of why something may matter, and more importantly, why it may matter to them, we're going to be in a much better position to get to know more people to collaborate with, and have the collaborations be more effectual for getting some of the changes done that will help us preserve a system that both we want to live in, that we can survive in, and that the rest of the planet isn't degraded by. Some things that society might find are acceptable as opposed to something that, again, shows up on the 11 o'clock news. I'm not home for the 6 o'clock news. It's a conversation. And I think on the back of your handout today, it says, this is the start of a conversation. And it can't end here. We have to take it out. We have to expand it. And the things you listed hit home. They hit the target. And so now it's a matter of figuring out how we make it real. That relies on each of us. Thank you.